Let me tell you about the day I watched a girl no taller than my shoulder make 40,000 aliens go completely silent. I've told this story a lot of times. In cargo bays, in waiting lines at the transit hubs, once to a VETH customs officer who didn't believe a word of it until he checked the arena records himself and then wouldn't stop apologizing. And every time I tell it, somebody asks me the same thing at the end. They ask if I'm exaggerating, if maybe I remembered it bigger than it was, the way people do with things that scared them. I always say the same thing back. No, if anything, I made it smaller, because the truth is I still don't have words big enough for what she did, and I was standing 40 meters away when she did it. So let me start at the beginning, slow. The way it actually happened. My name doesn't matter much for this. I was a maintenance contractor back then, low grade, the kind of human who gets shipped out to the rim colonies to fix atmospheric scrubbers because the pay is triple and nobody asks questions about your record. I'd been off Earth for 9 years at that point, long enough that I'd stopped being homesick, long enough that I'd started to believe the things they said about us out there. You have to understand what it was like being human in the galaxy back then. This was before everyone knew. We were a joke mostly, a curiosity. The little pink species from the water planet who somehow clawed their way into the stars without a proper gravity well or a warrior caste or any of the things the big species thought you needed. They tolerated us the way you tolerate a stray animal that won't leave. Useful for cheap labor, funny to look at, not a threat. I believed it too. I want to be honest about that. I'd spent 9 years shrinking myself, keeping my head down, apologizing when a Korth twice my size shoved past me in a corridor. That's just what you did. You survived by being small. The station I'm talking about was called Vashendoru. Big trade hub, way out on the threshold reach, where about a dozen species crossed paths to buy and sell and cheat each other. And the heart of Vashendoru, the thing that pumped credits through the whole rotten place, was the Colosseum. Now when I say Colosseum, forget what you're picturing. It wasn't stone. It wasn't ancient. It was this enormous ring of black alloy and floating light, hung in the middle of the station like a jewel in a crown, and it could seat 40,000 beings from 100 worlds. They didn't fight to the death there, not usually. It was more like sport. Blood sport, sure, but regulated. 2 combatants, a set of ancient rules older than half the species watching, and a crowd that paid enormous money to see something die a little. The arena floor itself was a marvel. They could reshape it between bouts. Sand for the old blood traditionalists, water for the aquatics. Broken terrain, jungle, zero-G cages. Whatever the promoters thought would sell. And above it all hung the light rigs, throwing color across the sand, and the sound system that could take one being scream and make 40,000 feel it in their teeth. I wasn't supposed to be there that day. That's the thing people forget when I tell it. I almost wasn't there at all. I was 3 levels down, elbow deep in a coolant line that fed the arena's climate systems, cursing at a fitting that wouldn't seat right. My supervisor was a Greenock named Tulvo, big, patient, 4 arms, breath like a swamp. He liked me well enough, and when I finally got the fitting sealed, he clapped me on the shoulder with one of those enormous hands and said, "You should come up. There's a human fighting today." I remember I laughed. I actually laughed at him. A human in the Colosseum who signed the death certificate. Because that's what it was. That's what everyone assumed. Humans didn't fight in the Colosseum. Humans couldn't. We were slow and soft and small. Sometimes one of us got desperate enough, deep enough in debt, cornered enough that they'd sign up for a bout just for the appearance fee, and the crowd would howl with laughter for about 90 seconds until the human got broken in half. It was a comedy act, a palate cleanser between the real fights. Tulvo just looked at me with those wet dark eyes and said, "This one's different. Come see." I didn't have anything better to do. My shift was done. So I climbed the maintenance ladders up to the contractor's gallery, this little wedge of standing room they gave to the working crews, and I found a spot at the rail. and I looked down into the bowl of the Colosseum for the first time in months. And I felt it right away, something in the air. You know how a room feels different when everyone in it is waiting for the same thing? Multiply that by 40,000. The crowd was loud, but it was a nervous loud, a hungry loud. Word had gotten around. There was going to be a human in the sand, and everybody wanted to watch her die. Sorry. That was the part that got them going. Not just a human female, small even by our standards, and they'd matched her against a Draka. Let me tell you about the Draka, because if you don't understand what a Draka is, you don't understand what happened next. The Draka were a warrior species. Not warriors like humans played at being, I mean the real thing, bred for it across 10,000 years, 3 meters of muscle and armored hide and instinct. They had a second set of arms that folded against the ribs, and they came out when a Draka meant to kill. Their skin was like plated leather, dark green going to black at the joints. They had a crest of bone along the skull that they'd file into points. And they fought in the Colosseum the way the rest of us breathed. It was just what they were. The Draka in the sand that day was named Koreth Von. I learned the name later. At the time I just saw the shape of him and my stomach dropped because he was a champion, undefeated. He had this way of standing in the center of the ring, completely still, letting the crowd wash over him, like the noise was food and he was full. He'd killed things bigger than a human without breaking rhythm, and they'd put a girl in front of him. I turned to Tolvo and I said, "Quiet, this isn't a fight, this is an execution." He didn't answer, he was watching her. So I watched her too. She came out of the fighter's gate on the far side, and the whole crowd made this sound, this low, delighted, cruel sound, like 40,000 people leaning forward at once. She walked out into the light and she looked exactly as small as they'd hoped, maybe 1.5 meters. Dark hair pulled back tight. She wore fighting leathers, plain ones, no house colors, no sponsor marks. She had no armor to speak of, and she carried herself like, I don't know how to describe it except that she carried herself like she'd walked out onto 100 floors like this one, and none of them had killed her yet. She wasn't scared. That was the first strange thing. Everybody who comes out to die is scared. You can see it. It's in the shoulders, the neck, the way the eyes keep flicking to the exits. I'd seen humans dragged out into that sand and I'd watched them shake. This girl wasn't shaking. She walked to her mark, planted her feet, and looked up at Koreth Von across 40 meters of sand like she was reading a menu. The crowd noticed too, not all at once. But there were pockets of them that quieted, here and there, little cold spots in the noise, where somebody had looked closely and seen what I was seeing and didn't quite know what to make of it. Tolvo leaned down to me. "She's fought before," he said. 6 bouts all here." 6, I said, "and she's still how?" "Won them," he said, "all 6. I remember the exact feeling of that landing on me. Won them. A human. 6 bouts in the Colosseum of Vashandoro against whatever monsters they'd put across from her, and she'd won all 6 and was still standing there small and calm in the light. I looked at her differently after that. I started looking at the way she stood, and now that I was looking, I could see it. The stillness in her wasn't the frozen stillness of prey. It was the other kind, the kind that's about to move. The announcer's voice came down over everything then in the trade tongue, doing the thing announcers do. Rolling out Koreth Von's name and his kills and his titles, and the crowd roared each one, and Koreth stood in his stillness and drank it. Then the voice got to her, and you could hear the amusement in it, the little curl of contempt. And challenging the champion from the water world Earth. They didn't even give her a real introduction. Just where she was from, said like a punchline. The crowd laughed. 40,000 beings laughing at the same time is a physical thing. You feel it on your skin. She didn't react. She just kept her eyes on Koreth. There was a Draka in the crowd near our gallery. A whole knot of them actually come to watch their champion, and they were the loudest. One of them, big even for his kind, was leaning over the rail bellowing something at her in their own language, and the others were laughing that clicking Draka laugh. I didn't understand the words. I understood the meaning fine. And here's the part I have to slow down for, because this is where it started to go wrong, before the fight even began. The rules of the Colosseum are old, older than the station, older than most of the species that sit in it. And one of the oldest rules is the rule of the ready mark. Both fighters take their marks. The arena master calls the ready. And no one touches the sand or the fighters until the ready is called. It's sacred. It's the one thing even the Draka respect because their own honor code is built on it. You don't strike before the ready. You just don't. So they were both on their marks, and the arena master was walking out to the center to call the ready, and the whole bowl was holding its breath. And that big Draka in the crowd, the one who'd been bellowing, he threw something. I didn't see what it was at first. Something heavy. A drinking vessel, I think, one of the metal ones they served the strong stuff in. He threw it down out of the stands, hard, aimed right at her, and it caught her across the side of the face. I saw her head snap sideways. I saw the spray of blood, dark in the arena light. I heard the sound it made even from where I stood, this flat, ugly crack, and the crowd. The crowd cheered. They cheered, because a human had been hurt, and that was funny, and it didn't matter that it broke the oldest rule in the place. She was just a human. The rule wasn't for her. The rule was for real fighters, and she wasn't real to them. I felt something turn over in my chest. 9 years of keeping my head down and being small, and I felt it turn over. Because I knew that feeling. Every human out there knew that feeling. The one where they hurt you and then they laugh, and you're supposed to take it. You're supposed to fold yourself smaller and pretend it didn't happen, because the alternative is worse. I gripped the rail. Tulvo put a hand on my shoulder, not to comfort me. To hold me still. He knew. He'd worked with humans long enough to know what that moment does to us. Down in the sand, she'd stumbled. One knee had gone down. Her hand had come up to her face, and when it came away there was blood on it, a lot of it, running down from her temple into the collar of her leathers. And Korath Vaughn, the champion, the one who lived by the old code, Korath turned his head and looked up at the Draka who'd thrown it. And I want to be fair to him, even now. I think for just a second Korath was angry. I think even he knew it was wrong. Because that vessel had cheated him. It had cheated him out of a clean fight, and a real warrior wants the clean fight. For 1 second I saw something like disgust cross that armored face. But then the crowd's laughter reached him. And I watched him decide it didn't matter. I watched him let it go. She was just a human. What did the rule matter over a human? He turned back to face her, and he rolled those enormous shoulders, and his second arms unfolded from his ribs, the kill arms, and he took 1 step off his mark toward her while she was still down on 1 knee with blood in her eyes. Off his mark, before the ready. He was going to do it too. He was going to break the rule right along with them, because the crowd had made it okay. Because when everyone laughs at the same time, it stops feeling like a crime. And that right there was the mistake. Not throwing the cup, not stepping off the mark. The mistake was thinking that hurting her had won something. The mistake was every single one of them believing, all the way down, that she was down. Because she wasn't. I was watching her hand, the one she'd braced against the sand when her knee went down, and I saw the fingers spread. I saw them dig in. I saw her weight shift forward onto that hand, not falling, not collapsing, coiling. And I realized with this cold drop in my stomach that she hadn't gone down because he'd hurt her. She'd gone down because it put her closer to the ground. She was about to move across. Let me tell you what I understood in that half a second, because I've had years to put it into words, and back then, it was just a feeling. I understood that she had been hit in the face with a metal vessel thrown by a grown Draka, hard enough to open her scalp, and she had not made a single sound. Not a cry, not a gasp, nothing. She had taken a blow that would have dropped most beings cold, and she had used the fall. She had let them think she was broken because a broken thing gets underestimated, and an underestimated thing gets close. She lifted her head, and through the blood running down her face, she wasn't looking at Korath's chest, or his arms, or the crest on his skull. She was looking at his knee. The arena master hadn't even reached the center yet. The ready hadn't been called. By every rule of that place, the fight had not begun. But the fight had begun the moment that cup left the Draka's hand, and she was the only one in 40,000 who understood that the rules were already broken, and there was no going back to before. Korath took his second step off the mark. And she moved. I'm going to stop here, right on the edge of it, because what happened next took 3 seconds and I need the room to tell it right. It deserves its own telling. It's the thing everyone asks me about, the 3 seconds, and if I rush it here it'll come out wrong. But I'll tell you this much to carry you over. Everything they believed about us, everything I'd believed about us, 9 years of it, every laugh and every shove, and every time we made ourselves small so the big species wouldn't notice us. All of it was built on one idea. The idea that a human is soft. That we're the little pink species from the water world who don't have a warrior caste and don't belong in the stars. They were about to find out what we actually are. They were about to find out why, on Earth, we don't have a warrior caste. It's because on Earth, every single one of us is descended from the thing that survived. Every human alive is the end of an unbroken line, 4 billion years long, of ancestors who were smaller than the thing that wanted to eat them and killed it anyway. We are not the biggest thing in the room. We were never the biggest thing in the room. We are the thing that learned to hunt the biggest thing in the room, in packs, with patience, on a planet that spent 4 billion years trying to kill us and failed. We're not soft. We're just polite, because we've learned over a very long time that it's usually kinder to let the big things think they're safe. Korath Von did not get to think he was safe for very much longer. 3 seconds. I've timed it out since, in my head, more times than I want to admit. Lying in my bunk on the long halls, staring at the ceiling, breaking it down into pieces the way you break down anything you can't stop thinking about. And every time I do it, I come out with the same answer. It was 3 seconds, maybe less. From the moment she moved to the moment it was over. But you can't tell 3 seconds worth of story in 3 seconds, so bear with me. I'm going to slow it all the way down, the way it slowed down for me while I was watching it, because that's the strange thing about moments like that, they stretch. Time gets thick. You see everything. Here's what I saw. She came off the sand low, not up low. That's the first thing that was wrong with it from a Draka's point of view. Everything that fights a Draka goes up, tries to meet that height, tries to get at the throat or the eyes, because that's where you'd hurt a big thing. She didn't go up. She stayed under. She came off that braced hand like something uncoiling, and she went in a straight line at his lead leg, and she was already moving faster than anything her size had any right to move. Korath was mid-step, that's the thing. He was mid-step, off his mark. His weight committed forward and down onto that lead knee. Both sets of arms coming up and out because he was expecting her to do what everything does, rise and come at his center, so he could catch her out of the air and end it the way he'd ended everything else. She didn't rise, she hit the knee. Now, I need to explain something about a Draka's knee because it matters and because I didn't understand it until later when I asked around. A Draka is built like a fortress, but a fortress has a gate. All that mass, all that armored hide, all that muscle, it stands on a joint. And the joint bends one way. It's a hinge. And a hinge that's carrying 3 meters of committed forward weight, mid-step, with nothing braced behind it, is the single most fragile thing on the whole enormous body. She knew that. That's what nobody understood watching it live, and what took me years to understand. She hadn't been fighting the Draka in front of her. She'd been studying his species for 6 bouts. She'd taken every scrap of what they thought was a comedy act, every time they laughed at her and put her in the sand against something that should have killed her, and she'd used it to learn exactly this. exactly where the gate was. She hit the outside of that committed knee with everything she had. Her whole body, her shoulder, the drive of both legs, all of it channeled into one point on the one part of him that could not take it. And the knee went the wrong way. I heard it. 40 meters up, over 40,000 voices, I heard it, this deep, wet, structural crack, the sound of something enormous failing all at once. It's a sound I'd never heard before, and I've never heard since, and I hope I never do again. The sound of a fortress losing its gate. That's 1 second. Korath Von came down. He came down the way big things come down, which is to say the whole world seemed to lurch with him. 3 meters of champion, all that mass that had been standing so still and drinking the crowd's love, all of it dropping sideways and forward because the leg that was holding it up had just stopped being a leg. And here's the thing about a being that's never fallen, a champion undefeated, a creature that has spent its whole life being the thing other things fall in front of. He didn't know how to fall. He had no instinct for it. His arms came up too late and in the wrong direction. He was a tower coming down, and there was nothing in 10,000 years of breeding that had taught him what to do about it. She was already gone from where she'd been. That's the part that made the arena stop breathing. She didn't stay to watch him fall. The instant the knee went, she was moving again, sliding around and under the falling mass, staying low, staying close, riding the collapse instead of getting clear of it. Where any other fighter in that arena's history would have leapt back to celebrate a hit, to let the crowd see, she went the other way. She went in, closer, toward the thing that was falling on top of her. Because she wasn't finished. Breaking his leg wasn't the fight. Breaking his leg was just how she got him down to her height. That's 2 seconds. He hit the sand, and the crowd. I have to tell you about the crowd, because the crowd is half the story. When the knee cracked, they didn't understand it. 40,000 beings who had come to watch a human die, and the sound that reached them was wrong, and for a moment there was this ragged confusion in the noise, this hitch, like a machine that swallowed something it shouldn't have. Some of them laughed still, out of habit, because their brains hadn't caught up to their eyes. Some of them had gone silent already. And a few, the Draka mostly, the ones who understood what that sound meant, a few of them had gone dead quiet in a way that was worse than any scream. The big Draka who'd thrown the cup, the one right near our gallery, I looked at him in that second, I don't know why, and I'll never forget his face. He had stopped laughing. His mouth was still open from the last laugh, but nothing was coming out of it. He was watching his champion fall to a human, and he could not make it be real. And down in the sand, Korath hit, and he did the thing that a cornered predator does, which is he tried to bring everything to bear at once. Both sets of arms, the whole armored bulk of him, twisting to crush the small thing that had done this. If he'd landed one blow, it would have ended her. There was that much power in him, even broken. One connect and she'd have been a smear on the sand, and the crowd would have gotten its execution after all. He didn't land one blow. Because she was already inside his reach, and inside the reach of a big thing is the one place a big thing can't hit you. All that length, all those arms, they're built to strike out across distance. Pull in close, get in under the chin, get in against the chest where the arms can't fold, and all that reach becomes useless. The fortress can't fire on something that's already through the gate and standing in the courtyard. She got in against him, and she went for the place she'd been aiming at the whole time. Not the throat, not the eyes, the crest. That bone crest along the skull, the one they file to points, the one that's all pride and display, it's anchored to the plate of the skull, and where it anchors at the base, there's a seam, a join, a weak line in all that armor where the crest meets the head. I learned later that Draka younglings are taught to protect it, that a strike there is one of the few things that can drop a grown Draka, and that it almost never happens in a real fight because you'd have to get past all that reach and all those arms to touch it. You'd have to be inside. You'd have to be right up against the skull of a 3-meter warrior with murder in all 4 hands. She was. She drove the heel of her hand up into the base of that crest, with a sound I felt more than heard, and something in the anchor of it gave. And Korath Vaughn, undefeated, champion of the Colosseum of Vashandoru, the thing they'd brought a human out to be killed by, went still. Not dead. I want to be clear about that because people always ask. She didn't kill him, she could have. She was right there, she had the position, she had the opening, and every rule of that place and every instinct in that crowd said finish it. Instead she stopped. She knelt over him with her hand still against the base of his crest and the pressure still on, holding him at the exact edge of it, the place where one more ounce ends him and where he knows, that she's chosen not to. That's 3 seconds. And then the silence. I have been in a lot of quiet places, dead ships, empty stations, the deep black between systems where there's nothing for 100 light years in any direction, and none of them, not one, was as quiet as the Colosseum of Vashandoru in the moment after a human girl put its champion down and chose to let him live. 40,000 beings, not a sound. Not one. The light rigs hummed overhead and you could hear them. You could hear them over 40,000 people because there was nothing else. The whole enormous bowl had stopped, all at once, every species in it, every one of them who had come to laugh, and they were looking down into the sand at this small, bloody human kneeling over the thing that was supposed to have killed her, and they could not make a single sound. She lifted her head. She looked around the bowl, slow. She had blood all down one side of her face from the cup, dried dark now and more of it fresh from somewhere, and she looked up into all those silent faces and she wasn't triumphant. That's what got me. She wasn't celebrating. There was nothing in her face that wanted their cheering. She just looked at them, one slow sweep around the whole ring, like she was letting each of them see her, letting it land, making sure they'd remember. And then she did the thing that I still can't fully explain, the thing that turned it from a fight into the story I've been telling for years. She let go of Korath. She took her hand off the crest, off the kill, and she sat back. And then she reached down and she took one of his enormous hands, one of the kill arms, the ones he'd unfolded to end her, and she pulled it, and she braced, and she helped him up. She helped him up. This small human who he had every reason to want dead, who had just broken his leg and cracked the anchor of his crest in front of 40,000 people and ended his career in 3 seconds. She got under his arm and took his weight, all that weight, on her own small frame, and she helped Korath Vaughn get his good leg under him and stand. Because he couldn't stand on his own. Because she'd made sure he couldn't. And rather than leave him broken in the sand for the crowd to see, she lifted him. I didn't understand it then. I understood it later, and I'll get to that because it's the whole point of everything. But in the moment, I just watched this impossible thing happen, this human holding up the champion, and I felt tears on my own face, and I didn't know when they'd started. The arena master, the one who'd never even reached the center to call the ready, who'd stood frozen through the whole thing, he finally moved. He came out into the sand. And by the rules of that place, by the oldest rules, he had to make a call, and there was only one call to make, even though nothing about it had happened the way the rules said it should. The champion could not continue. The challenger was standing. He raised his hand toward her. And still nobody cheered. You'd think they'd cheer. A win is a win, and the crowd loves a spectacle, and they'd just seen the greatest upset in the history of the place. But they didn't cheer, and I've thought a long time about why, and I think it's this. Cheering is for when you're entertained, and they weren't entertained. They were afraid. Something had happened in front of them that broke the story they told themselves about the galaxy, about where they sat in it and where we sat, and you don't cheer when the floor drops out. You go quiet. You hold very still. You wait to understand what the world is now. The big Draka near our gallery, the cup thrower, he was the first to make a sound. And it wasn't a jeer. He made this low sound, this thing deep in the chest, and the other Draka around him picked it up, and it rolled out across the whole knot of them. I didn't know what it was. I asked Tulvo. His 4 hands were gripping the rail, and he was shaking. This big swamp-breathing Greenock was shaking, and he said to me, quiet. That's the death song. They only make that sound for their own. For a Draka who dies with honor, he swallowed. They're making it for her. They were singing for a human. The proudest, cruelest warrior species in the Reach. The ones who'd thrown the cup and broken the oldest rule because a human wasn't worth respecting. They were singing the song they saved for their greatest dead, and they were singing it for a living human girl standing in the sand holding up the champion she'd beaten. Because she'd shown them something. That's the thing. She hadn't just beaten Korath. Anybody can beat somebody. She'd beaten him and then honored him. She'd taken the one thing he had left, his standing, his dignity, the chance to not be seen broken in the dirt, and she'd given it back to him when she had every right to grind it into the sand. And to a Draka, that's not mercy. Mercy would have been an insult. That's something else. That's the thing their whole code is built around and almost never actually achieves. That's honor. Real honor. The kind you can only show to someone once you've already won, when there's nothing left to gain by it. She'd outfought their champion and then out-honored their entire species, in 3 seconds and 1 act of grace, in front of 40,000 of them. And they knew it, and that's why they sang. Korath knew it too. I could see it, even from up there. He was leaning on her, this broken tower leaning on this small human, and he turned his head down and looked at her, and something passed between them that I couldn't hear and wouldn't have understood if I could. And then Korath Von did a thing that the Draka near us made a sound about, a sharp collective intake, because it meant something to them that I only half grasped. He lowered his crest to her. That filed, pointed, prideful crest, the very thing she'd cracked. He bowed it down toward this human who'd beaten him. The champion bowed to the human. And that was when the sound finally came. Not a cheer, bigger than a cheer. The whole bowl came apart at once, 40,000 beings from 100 worlds, all of it breaking loose together, and it wasn't the cruel, hungry roar from before. It was something I don't have a word for. It was the sound of a story ending and a different one starting. It was the sound of 40,000 people, finding out at the same instant that everything they thought they knew was wrong. I was screaming with them. I didn't decide to. I looked over and Tulvo was roaring, all 4 fists in the air, tears in those wet dark eyes, and every human in the contractor's gallery. There were maybe 9 of us up there. Every single one was screaming and grabbing each other, and I don't think one of us could have told you a word we were saying. 9 years of keeping my head down. 9 years of being small. And I stood at that rail and I screamed until my throat tore because down in the sand, one of us had stood up, and she hadn't just won, she'd made them sing. Down below, she got the arena medics to come out, waved them over, pointed at Korath, made them tend to him first, before her own face that was still bleeding. And only when they had Korath's weight off her, only when 3 medics had their hands on him and he was safe, did she let herself be led toward the fighter's gate. And she stopped once on the way. She turned and looked up at the crowd one more time, all that noise pouring down on her now, all that adoration that 90 seconds ago had been contempt. She didn't wave, she didn't raise a fist. She just looked at them, that same slow sweep, letting them see her, letting them remember. And then she walked out through the gate, small and bloody and unhurried, and the gate closed behind her, and 40,000 beings kept roaring at the empty sand because they didn't know how to stop. I turned to Tulvo. I could barely get the words out. I asked him. I don't even know why it was the thing I needed to know first. I asked him her name. He wiped his eyes with 2 of his hands and told me. And I'm going to make you wait for it. Just a little longer. Because her name matters, and what she did after that day matters even more. And there's a reason I've spent years telling this story to anyone who will listen in cargo bays and customs lines across half the galaxy. The 3 seconds are the part people ask about, but the 3 seconds aren't why I tell it. I tell it for what came after, for what she said when I finally met her, for the things she made me understand about us, about humans, about why we make ourselves small, and about what it costs, and about the one time it's worth stopping. That's part 3. Her name was Marase. Tulvo told me that up on the gallery, with the crowd still roaring below us, and I remember thinking it was too plain a name for what I just watched. Marseille. It sounded like somebody who fixed engines, somebody who stood in a transit line. It didn't sound like the person who just put a Draka champion in the sand in 3 seconds and made the whole species sing. But that was the thing about her I'd learn. That was the whole thing. She was plain. She was ordinary. That was the point. I didn't meet her that day. You don't just walk up to someone like that. She went behind the fighter's gate, and the medics had her, and the promoters had her, and there were about 100 beings between me and her. And anyway, what would I have said? I went back to my bunk and I lay there and I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the crack of that knee. I kept seeing her reach down and pull him up. But Vashendoru is a small place in the end, for all its 40,000 seats. And I was a maintenance contractor, which means I went everywhere. And about 11 days later I was down in the lower levels running a diagnostic on a water reclamation line, and I came around a corner into one of the crew galleys, and she was sitting there. Just sitting there. At a battered metal table, alone, with a cup of something steaming in front of her. In plain coveralls. The cut on her temple had scabbed over into a thin dark line that would scar. And nobody was bothering her, because down in the crew levels people leave each other alone, and I think that's exactly why she was down there instead of up in the fighters' quarters where they'd have been fussing over her. I stopped in the doorway like an idiot. She looked up. And I want to tell you, she had some kind of presence, some fire in the eye, something that marked her as different. She didn't. She looked tired. She looked like anybody. She looked at me the way you look at a stranger who's stopped in a doorway, a little wary, a little patient, waiting to find out what I wanted. I said the only true thing I had. I said, I saw it, the fight. I was up in the gallery. Something in her face closed a little. I understood later she'd had a lot of people wanting to talk to her about it, and most of them wanted the wrong things, wanted the thrill of it, wanted her to be the monster the crowd had discovered, wanted to stand near the story. So she just nodded, polite, and looked back down at her cup, waiting for me to want that too. And I don't know what made me say it, but I said, "Why'd you pick him up?" She looked back at me, different this time, really looked. "Everybody asks about the leg," I said, "or the crest, how you knew, but you had him, you could have left him down. Everybody in that whole place would have loved you for it. And you got under his arm, and you picked him up instead. I've been trying to figure out why for 11 days, and I can't." She was quiet for a while. Then she pushed the chair across from her out with her foot, an invitation, and I sat down, and that's how I came to spend about 2 hours talking to Marseille in a crew galley 3 levels under the Colosseum of Vashendoru. I'm not going to give you all of it. Some of it was just talk, but I'll give you the part that mattered, the part I've carried ever since. She told me she'd grown up in the colonies, same as a lot of us out on the rim. She told me her family had been the kind of small that we all learned to be, apologizing, folding down, getting out of the way. She said her father had a saying. When somebody bigger shoved past you, when somebody took what was yours, when somebody laughed at you, let them think they won. It's cheaper. He said it all the time. Let them think they won. And she believed it growing up. She lived it. Because it's true, it is cheaper, most of the time. You swallow it and you go home and you're alive and nothing's broken and tomorrow's the same as today. That's the deal we make out here. That's the deal I'd been making for 9 years. So why fight? I asked her. If that's what you believe, why sign up for the sand at all? And she told me about her first bout, how she hadn't meant to be a fighter, how she'd been in debt, the ordinary kind, the kind that eats you a little at a time, and the appearance fee for a Colosseum bout was more than she'd see in a year, and everybody knew the human died in 90 seconds, so it was basically money for letting yourself get hurt. She'd signed up to lose. She'd signed up to be the joke, take the fee, and if she was lucky walk away with a limp and enough credits to breathe. And then I got out in the sand, she said, and this thing came at me, and I watched it come. And I realized it had already decided how it was going to go. It knew before it started exactly how it ended, because they always know. That's the thing about the big ones. They've never once had it go the other way, so they stop watching. They stop being careful. They come at you already thinking about the next thing. She turned her cup around on the table. And I thought, it's not paying attention, and I am. That was her whole secret in the end. It wasn't strength. Obviously, it wasn't strength. It was that everything she fought had stopped paying attention a long time ago because it had never needed to, and she never stopped. She watched. 6 bouts she watched. Every draka she saw in the crowd, every champion who came out to be worshipped. She was studying the gate in the fortress while they were busy being fortresses. She learned them, better than they'd ever bothered to learn anything, because she was the one who couldn't afford not to. That's why you win, I said. That's why I win, she agreed. But that's not what I asked, I said. I asked why you picked him up. And she went quiet again, longer this time, and when she spoke, her voice had changed. It was lower. She wasn't performing it. She was telling me something she'd worked out for herself alone and maybe hadn't said out loud before. You know what they think we are, she said. The soft ones, the small ones from the water world. And the thing is, they're not wrong that we're small. I am small. Look at me. He could have held me in one hand. She shook her head. For a long time I thought the fight was about proving them wrong, showing them we're not soft. That's what everybody wants me to have done out there. They want the story where the human turns out to be the scariest thing in the room, where we were the monster all along, and now they know it. She looked at me. But that's a bad story. That's just being the new biggest thing in the room. That's becoming the thing that shoved my father aside. If all I did out there was teach 40,000 people to be afraid of humans, then I didn't win anything. I just changed which species does the shoving. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to break it. When I had him down, she said, I could feel it, all of it. 40,000 of them wanting me to finish it. And a part of me wanted to. God, you don't know how much a part of me wanted to after the cup, after all of it, after 9 years of. She stopped. She didn't finish that one. She didn't have to. I knew the sentence. I'd been living inside it for 9 years myself. But I thought about my father's saying, let them think they won, and I finally understood it. I understood what it actually costs. What does it cost? I asked, quiet. Everything, she said. It costs you everything, a little at a time. You let them think they won and you go home alive, sure, but you left a piece of yourself in the sand every single time. And you tell yourself it's cheaper, and it is cheaper, right up until you look back and there's nothing left of you. That's the deal. That's the deal we all made. We stayed small and we stayed alive, and we gave ourselves away by the handful to do it. She wrapped both hands around the cup. So I wasn't going to do that anymore. But I wasn't going to become the shove either. There's 2 ways to stop being small, you know. You can get bigger, get meaner, get scarier, make them afraid of you. That's the easy one. Or you can stay exactly the size you are and stand up anyway, and when you win, when you've actually got them down and you could take everything, you give it back. You show them there was never anything to be afraid of. That the small thing they laughed at could have ended them and chose not to. That's not weakness. They think mercy is weakness right up until it's coming from someone who could kill them, and then it's the strongest thing in the world. That's why I picked him up. She looked at me and she almost smiled, tired. I didn't want to teach them to fear us, she said. Anybody can make somebody afraid. I wanted to teach them to be ashamed of what they did in that arena, and you can't shame someone by beating them. You can only shame them by beating them and then being better than they were. So I picked him up. And now every one of those 40,000 has to live with the fact that they threw a cup at someone who could have killed their champion, and instead she helped him stand. That'll sit in them longer than fear ever would. I've thought about that conversation for years. I've turned it over and over, and I've come to believe she was right, because I watched what happened after, all across the reach, in the seasons and the years that followed. And I'll tell you, because that's really the end of the story. It didn't happen fast. These things don't, but it happened. Word got out the way it does. The recording of the fight went everywhere, you couldn't stop it, it was on every feed in the reach within a cycle, but here's the thing. It wasn't the leg break that spread, it wasn't the crest. Fights get broken, that's nothing new. What spread was the end, her getting under his arm, him bowing his crest. The Draka singing the death song for a living human. That's what people couldn't stop watching. That's what they showed each other. Not the violence, the grace. And it changed things. Small at first. Humans on Vashendoru stopped getting shoved in the corridors quite so much. Then it was more than that. Then it was other stations, other hubs, other species who'd never met a human doing the math differently when one walked past. Because the story they'd all told themselves, the little soft species from the water world, that story was dead. But she'd made sure the story that replaced it wasn't the monster story. It was something stranger and stronger. It was. They could hurt you badly, and they choose not to. Be very careful with that. That's a different kind of respect than fear. Fear makes people want to destroy you before you grow. But that makes them want to deserve you. It's the only kind of respect that lasts. Koreth Von never fought again. The leg didn't heal right. A Draka champion's body isn't built to come back from that. But he didn't vanish into shame the way a broken champion usually does. He became something else. He talked about her publicly to his own people, in that hard, proud voice of theirs. He told the Draka that in 10,000 years of their history, he had never once been shown honor the way a human female showed it to him in the sand of Vashendoru, and that any Draka who called humans soft after that was calling Koreth Von a liar, and they could take it up with him directly. Nobody took it up with him. And Mara say. She fought a few more times, won them all, of course. And then one day she just stopped and she took the winnings and she paid off the debt that had put her in the sand in the first place, and she left the Colosseum behind. Last I heard, she'd bought a small hauler and gone out to the deep rim, running cargo, ordinary as anything. Small. Plain. The size she'd always been. I think that's exactly what she wanted. I don't think she ever wanted to be big. I think she wanted to prove you didn't have to be. I finished my contract eventually. I went other places. I'm older now, and I've told this story in a lot of cargo bays and a lot of customs lines, and I always get the same question at the end, the one I told you about at the start. They ask if I'm exaggerating. And I tell them no, if anything I made it smaller. But there's a second question I get sometimes from the humans. The young ones especially, the ones just shipping out for the first time, still learning to keep their heads down, still learning to be small. They ask me what the lesson is, what they're supposed to take from it. And I think they want me to say something about strength, about how we're tougher than they think, how we're the thing that survived 4 billion years, how underneath the soft we're the scariest thing in the black. And all that's true, but it's not the lesson. I tell them what she told me. There are 2 ways to stop being small. You can get bigger, get meaner, teach them to be afraid. That's the easy one, and it costs you everything too, just slower. Or you can stay exactly the size you are and stand up anyway, and on the day you finally win, when you've got the whole world down and you could take it all, you reach down instead and you pick it back up and you let it stand. Anybody can make the galaxy afraid of them. She made it ashamed of ever laughing. And that's the thing I've never been able to make small, no matter how many times I tell it. That's why I keep telling it. A girl no taller than my shoulder walked into the cruelest room in the Reach, took the worst it had, ended its champion in 3 seconds, and then taught 40,000 people that the strongest thing in the universe isn't the fist that lands. It's the hand that could and doesn't.